please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll, please.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Deeds? Here. Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Shaw? Here. Ms. O'Day? Here.
I'll start by saying this is the first of two meetings this evening. This is just an organizational meeting with a bunch of logistics that we do. Then we adjourn from this and start again with an official January Board of Education meeting. I'd also like to yield the floor to Mrs. O'Day, who I think has a message for the board and the community.
Good evening, everybody. I have some bittersweet news to share. I'm just going to read it because I want to not cry in the middle of this. Okay, so my family will be moving to Ethiopia for 2 years. My husband was appointed as the Undersecretary General for Finance and for Development with a new international organization that's headquartered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Since I will not be a resident in the Granville School District for the duration of our time there, I have to resign from my position on the Granville Board of Education. We have amazing schools with top-tier teachers, and I'm so grateful I had the opportunity to serve our district in this role. I have greatly enjoyed my experience on the board, and I appreciate everyone who supported me along the way. I wish the district and community the best of luck. I will miss Granville and my colleagues very much. On to a more technical note, my resignation will be effective January 31st. Mr. Miller and Mr. Brown will elaborate on the details about filling my seat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been great to serve with you. We'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about it, like you said, later in the agenda, but I think that clarifies things for our organizational meeting, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Next order of business is the nomination and election of president and vice president. So, can we get a nomination for presidency? And then remember, a second is not necessary.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Miller for president for 2023.
Any other nominations? Okay.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. O'Day? Aye.
Okay, so that was just the nomination. Now we have to elect Mr. Miller as president. So can I have a motion and second?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
I yield the next election to the newly elected president. Congratulations, Mr. Miller.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much
for your service. Truly honored. The next item on the agenda is to open the floor for nominations for vice president of the Granville School Board. Are there nominations?
I'd like to nominate Mr. Wolf. Second. No, do we do second?
No,
Are
but
there-
that's okay.
Any additional nominations?
I'm sorry.
Okay, I believe the nominations are closed.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye. Now we proceed to vote on
The
vice
election.
president, Mr. Fred Wolf. So, vote please.
We need a motion.
So second.
Now we can discuss it. You ready, Fred?
I'm happy and willing, thank you.
Fantastic.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Mr. Wolf, and thank you very much, both of you, for serving in those roles. We appreciate it.
It's truly an honor. Now, we have a number of logistical things to go through. You want to do that?
Yes.
Do that?
Yeah, so item 7 is the approval of board policies and regulations currently in effect.
So moved. Second.
And so that is exactly how it sounds. Everything from the previous year rolls over into the next year.
Great.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Item 8 is the adoption of the agenda and meeting notification procedures.
So moved.
Second.
Also, as they sound, the notification process for organizational, regular, special meetings, and if there's any personal notice of meetings.
And the new dates for this year are in the agenda.
They're coming up here, and those are future approval.
Great.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Excellent. Item 9, as you are aware, board members have, or their designees have appointments to certain positions within the community. So I'm just going to read through a couple because some of these are multi-year appointments. So Brian Costa has been serving as your trustee on the Granville Recreation District. He does a fantastic job, not only as a volunteer coach, but also serves in multiple positions within the community, including our liaison to the Granville Police Department. So his term will continue. Our appointment to the CTEC board is Fred Wolf. I believe that's also a couple of multi-year term, 3-year term, and this will be his second year in that position. We have Cecile Shaw, who is our representative to the Granville Education Foundation, and Cecile is continuing in that role for another year. So we have that assignment. The Granville Community Authority, or Community Foundation, Scott Mortimer has served in that capacity last year and is willing to serve again. So he is going to continue in that role. We have the Licking County Tax Incentive Review Committee and the Newark Granville Community Authority, which had a meeting tonight earlier at 5:30. Brittany is our representative to those positions. The next position, I'm going to put almost an announcement out there because Mr. Young, who served in that capacity for several years, the Granville Village Planning Commission, it's an ex officio position, but it is important to have a representative in those planning commission meetings with a perspective of the school district. And so that is currently vacant. If anyone is interested and wants to serve in those capacities, all you have to do is reach out to me. I know the village is also going to solicit applications for that role as well. It tends to be a matters box for the planning commission. Several members who were in that ex officio position for us then went on to voting members once a vacancy was available. So we do not have a person at this time to fill that role, but we will be in the near future. Granville Chamber of Commerce, Brittany is actually a board member, we are represented in the chamber as well, so both of us serve in that capacity. I serve as the Regional Advisory Council and Legislative Liaison for the district, and we thought it would be appropriate at this meeting to maybe submit the OSBA meeting delegate and their alternate, thank you. Look at how good that is. We finish each other's sentences now. For which we typically do leading into the November Capitol Conference. We thought it would be good to take care of that business now. So those two are open and can be filled by any member that's going to be present at that time. It is kind of a painful process because the meeting is long, and so I would appreciate anyone volunteering and taking that responsibility on. I did. I just wanted to.
enjoyed it.
I know you did.
I enjoyed that
She did. Rhonda served in that capacity last year, and I just want to be honest about what it is that you're agreeing to.
We're gonna miss it. I'll take one for the team.
Oh.
Fred, you did a great job.
Good.
For you.
Oh, if Fred will do that, I'll take the alternates.
Okay. Thank you. Excellent. So that is a full slate of the board member designee assignments. And in the future, if we have a candidate for the Village Planning Commission, you will vote on that separately versus approving. Oh, sorry.
Second.
Any other
Any
questions?
discussion about that? Okay.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye.
The next item, number 10, is superintendent committee assignments. As you know, we have 6 benchmark for superintendent committees, but we'll take a motion and then a second. We do. That's a good point.
Because they're not filled in.
Yeah, they're not filled in at all. So
Okay.
typically, at this meeting, we assign who wants to represent those superintendent committees. Again, they're not board formal committees, they're superintendent committees. They're advisory in nature, and they're meant to inform the administration that then informs the board on items related to the whole child world-class education, operations and resources, finance, community, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all of those committees, we are very fortunate to have local community members that give time and energy to those committees to discuss those items. So,
These are
Let's
all-
start 'em out.
These are all great organizations. I'd be happy to be a part of any or all of them and things like that. I've been participating in the finance committee for quite a long time, and I would like to continue that. I've also been on the operations and resources committee just recently, and I'm happy to continue that unless there are many others that want to join. So I would put myself down for 3 and 4.
okay.
I'd like to continue on whole child. I'd be happy to do community.
Okay.
I'm happy to do operations and finance.
Okay.
No, like world class and diversity.
Okay. All right. And then once we have an appointed member, we can open that conversation up to absolutely
Yeah.
whatever roles or responsibilities they want to assume.
I think that's,
How would you do a motion?
Yeah.
we have a motion on those appointments?
So moved.
Second.
Yeah.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw? Aye. Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay, excellent. The next item is 11, board member compensation. That is the Board of Education compensation rate at $50 per week.
So moved. Second.
And that has not increased for at least 5 or 6 years that I can remember. So since January 2016, thank you very much.
What was it then?
It was $25. Yeah.
These for 2 hours of babysitting?
Yeah.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Next item, 12, is the resolution to create the service fund. This is the board service fund to pay for expenses for board members and doing their official representation and meeting expenses. It has not changed in several years as well, at $3,000.
So moved.
Second.
Has it been used?
Yeah, so typically we pay for OSBA and some of the other trainings, like Board Member 101 and other things like that board members attend.
Okay. Well,
Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Item 13 is the resolution to establish board meeting dates, times, and locations. I did try and talk with the National Championship Committee organization to move the National Championship off of the Monday night, the second Monday of the calendar, but, you know, they denied my request, and I'm just glad Ohio State is not in there. Because it would have been a really fast game. So, any questions or concerns related to the agenda? Just one anomaly is July 7th. Typically, we try and have a meeting right before the July 10th deadline, which is the deadline for teachers to notify their districts if they are leaving the district via their contract.
Okay. That's fun.
We have a motion and a second.
Second.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Okay. Number 14 or 13, A, B, all the way through L, is all the standing authorizations for the calendar year 2023, or 2023. And that is the authorizations for hiring, approvals, pay bills, all the authorizations that you grant us to operate the school district on your behalf in between meetings. You can read through that list. If you have any questions, I can answer any questions, but
And it's 14A through 14L.
Yeah.
13.
but it's
Right.
14 listed, but it's 13 on my agenda.
I'll change it to
Yeah.
14 in a minute.
Yes.
Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Good stuff. Regular policy. That's fine.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day? Aye. Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Miller?
Aye. Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn the organizational meeting.
So second.
Oh,
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day? Aye. Mr. Miller?
hi. Meeting adjourned, but not so fast. Now we get on to the exciting stuff. So, I'd like to call to order the January regular meeting of the Prenville Schools Board of Education. If you would, please rise and join me in the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The roll, please. Yeah.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
Ms. Shaw?
Here.
Ms. O'Day?
Here.
Very good. Welcome. We're ready to proceed with the agenda. It's,
Approval of the agenda, but with,
Oh, yeah.
with note that we are going to include today's resignation effective January 31st in the consent agenda.
Thank you for that modification. We'll make that change. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Okay. Next, I come over here for recommendations.
So, as a part of every board meeting, we have a commendation section where we highlight student and staff accomplishments and achievements. January, we reserve as a thank you to the Board of Education. You just approve your compensation, and it's obviously a pittance compared to the work that you do to lead this organization. So this is Board Recognition Month, and we created a bit of a tradition about 10 years ago, I think, where we purchase a book that is relevant to some of the work that we're doing within the district, whether we read it as an administrative team or as a staff or faculty as a whole. And it really is to celebrate the work that we're doing within the organization that you are helping to lead. school board members are community members that dedicate a lot of time, talent, and energy to the success of our organization. They are our governance body. They are only a Board of Education when they are in this meeting and operate as a unit of 5. And I want to specifically, it's appropriate to talk about Rana's departure here because she was newly elected last year. And one of the things that I think hardest for a new board member is to come up to speed on how the board operates and all the nuances of being a board and the challenges sometimes that you face when you think about, leadership and service to the community. And I want to commend Rana and really highlight the approach that you took. You went to several OSBA trainings where you really dug into what are the roles and responsibilities of a board member. Something that I commend because our job is we're learning for life, and you demonstrated that as a board member. Everybody around you is a little bit more seasoned, and so that experienced. But they also have taken that same journey that you took as well. And so I want to say we're going to miss you tremendously. And we wish you all the best. It's such an adventure. I hope Maria does a story about, what the family is going to do because I think it's really cool. So we're just very excited for you and your family. But it also is sad for us because we're going to go through the process of getting a new member and building their capacity to join this team. And I do call it a team because we really operate as a governance team to lead and facilitate the learning that occurs every single day within the school district, and you play a critical role in that. All of you have. So with that, what we are giving you tonight is the Strength Finders book. Strength Finders is by the Gallup organization, and it's a research-based tool that looks at everybody has strengths. And so you're asked a series of questions on an online tool. You have the ability to take it in the back. There's a little code that you get access to. And it identifies your top 5 strengths. And so for me, my top 5 strengths is, and it's going to be shocking, I'm futuristic. I'm a strategic thinker. I'm an arranger. I'm strong in belief and in. So those are my top 5 strengths. Now, I have a lot of other strengths. I have a lot of other weaknesses. But I think it's important to think about the strengths that you have and what you bring to the table. And then when you look at it in the picture of a team, which we've done as an administrative group, you really start to understand all the strengths that we have collectively. And that's, one of our portrait of a graduate competencies is collaboration, and knowing your strengths is essential in that process. And so we've used this with the administrative team, but this year, earlier in the year, we actually used it with students in the experiential mastermind class. And the other night, they had their public presentations. And I asked everybody, tell me about what you learned about your strengths. And they all remembered all 5, which is pretty impressive. And so I think sometimes in education and in the accountability system, we look at things from a deficit perspective, what kids can't do, versus their strengths and what kids can do. And we're always impressed with what kids can do, and if given the opportunity. And I think that's something that this organization has really supported over the last several years and last decade. So with that, I want to say thank you very much to every one of you, and your strengths add to this collective body, and I will pass out your certificate of appreciation from OSBA, but also your Strength Finders. Yes, it's a little bit of a shorter read. I've given some novels in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes my accommodations, but I will say, can we give them a round of applause? They deserve it.
Thank you, Jeff. That was very kind of you. I almost cried.
Yeah.
I will miss you all and my role.
All right. Next, we have staff reports.
Yes, so the first staff report is Mr. Burnett, who's going to come up and talk a little bit about the 23-24 calendar. This is the first reading. We are required to go through a two-step process for approving the calendar. And just as a reminder that the calendar is part of a committee process that is part of the collective bargaining agreement. So Mr. Burnett works with the Teachers Association to develop the calendar collaboratively and then bring it to you for Yep, sorry.
All right, so I missed kind of what Jeff said there in terms of what the parameters were, so I was trying to get that up there, but we're required to have an initial review of the calendar.
Very briefly.
Yeah.
This happened to me last time. If you unplug it and plug it back in.
Yeah, that's what I just
that
did.
will
It's-
last.
Did you press the question mark button?
There we go.
Can't touch it.
Talk fast.
So the calendar committee is part of our GEA contract. There are groups, a group of administrators and a group of teachers that work on this. We are bound by a couple parameters. One, we have to follow CTEC's calendar somewhat. They just finished up with theirs. That's why we held off a little bit on making sure that they finalized their calendar before we got into this. And also, we have 174 student days and 184 staff days. Those are contractual items that we have to make sure we include. So outside of that, you kind of have a little bit of freedom in terms of where you put things, but unless you're going to start school in July and end it in June, you're kind of limited in terms of where we can put certain things. So you'll see the start of school next year. We're proposing that it be August 23rd. That's a little bit later than it's been. We're kind of getting to that point where starting school on the 16th and next year will be the 15th. At some point we got to make that shift to that fourth week of August, and we decided that this year would be as good as any to make that particular change. The only thing that really impacts is it does move the end of the first semester past the winter break, which ends on December 20th. But honestly, that's been more historically true than having winter break be the end of the first semester like it was this year. That's kind of an anomaly. So something that we're used to. It really only affects the high school with exams. They do the exams before winter break anyways to give the students a true 2 weeks off. So again, nothing that we're not accustomed to doing. The triangles that you see on there are professional development days. They're strategically located obviously there's 4 before the start of school, but then we have one in September, one in November to do the work that we need to do with the staff to get through the school year in terms of different initiatives that come up. For example, next year we're going to have some new dyslexia mandates that have to be put into place, and we've already started using that time somewhat this year as well. That's just one example of what that time can be used for. The one at the end of the year really sets the tone or the stage for the following year, and we very strategically placed it right here in April. The rationale for that, if you see the calendar, you kind of look, about every 4 or 5 weeks we give the students a 3 or 4 day weekend. Sometimes that's coinciding with holidays that we have to take school off for. But when we get to April, because of where spring break is, where CTEC decided to put spring break this year, there's this month of April is testing, and that's what it is. There's students are taking 2, 3, 4 state tests that are each 2 days apiece during that time. So we thought it would be very, very beneficial to have a professional development day for teachers in there to give students maybe a 3 day weekend just to kind of catch their breath. In the middle of that, and then for the high school students gearing up for the AP test in early March. So there is a little bit of rhyme to that reason as far as that goes. Other than that, the stars are days where we don't have school. A lot of them are due to contractual items. For example, this one right here on February 16th and the other one on October 20th. Those are the weeks of conferences. So teachers have conferences all week. They're related to school between 1 and 4 nights a week, and then we give them that Friday of that particular week off. So very often we try to coincide those with other days off, or professional development days, or holidays to give the students a 4-day weekend as well. So mini spring breaks, mini fall breaks, mini winter-ish breaks, whatever you want to call them. And then finally, we get out of school on May 30th. Graduation will happen that Sunday before. We looked at the almanac and the weather's supposed to be perfect that day, so that's why we decided on May 26, 2024 as the graduation date. And then the 3 days of exams for underclassmen at the high school level. So that's our proposal, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have related to our calendar.
I have a question. Somebody reached out to me about a spring break. I don't remember when it usually is. Did it move forward or back?
It's, so that really, winter break and spring break, when we're required to look at and follow a CTEC schedule, I mean, we can start on a different school day because so many people have half days or only certain students come on the first few days of the school year. So we don't start on the school day, but the breaks are really aligned to them. We actually, as a district, advocated for the week of March 11th to be our spring break. We lost. So, we're not the only county school in the county that CTEC serves, and that would have been beneficial on a lot of levels. For example, that's the week Denison and OSU or OTC have their spring break. And we had a lot of conversation and advocated for that, but unfortunately that's what they chose. I don't like this date either from a testing perspective, but at the same time, we are expected to model their spring break. And for our students that go to CTEC, that their friends are in spring break that week. I think it was unfair for them to maybe have a different spring break and not be able to have opportunities with them during that time. So I understand that part of it, just getting what we wanted, and that's part of being collaborative.
So we align with CTEC because we have students there?
Correct. And there's also statute that says you need to align with your local career setting. That's part of the state guidelines for setting up your calendar.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
And then with regards to teacher in-service days, do you have 8? You said?
Yes, well, we have 10 total. 2 of them are conference exchange days, and then 8 actual in-service days.
Okay, and is that typical for the county, or do we have more than other schools, or are you just not sure?
I'm not exactly sure how many all other schools have. I would say it's fairly similar to what other schools have.
And then a question not really about the calendar, but will it be on the website beginning tomorrow? When do we usually put this up for families to?
Well, you won't officially adopt it as a board until the next meeting, which is
Okay.
February 7th, I believe.
27.
27th, forgot the T. So what we'll do is we'll put it out there for the community to see. We'll just say it's in draft form, and it'll be officially voted on February 27th, just because I know people are making plans for next year already.
That's
So
what- yeah. Yep, great, thank
we'll
you.
do it that way.
I've tried to find a Google Calendar with just this information, but like when this comes out, everybody's got to go and stick it in their own calendar and things like that. I'd like to make sure that we actually have a Google Calendar that we can share that's just this information for district-wide. And I've tried multiple times to find it, maybe I'm just not looking in the right place, but it would be really helpful so that not every 2,000 people have to put this in their own calendar. I have one that can be exported or imported or synchronized as things change. So,
And Outlook along those same lines, I would say as well.
what's that?
Outlook as well would be.
Yeah, exactly, right. If we can, and I think there are mechanisms to do that. Different schools have them for things like that, but I think at district level, with just this information or maybe other key district level information would be really valuable to have out there. So
We're getting a thumbs up from Glenn. So
all right,
we'll work on that.
thank you.
I think we should wait until it's officially adopted to do that.
That's
But in the interim, we can put it out there for once in draft form, so.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for our questions. Yeah. Okay.
give a brief update on strategic planning, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight related to the strategic planning process. As you are aware, we've started a strategic planning task force that is taking a look at 5 different focus areas. 1 is enrollment, 2 is housing analysis, 3 is fiscal, the 4th is a facility study, and then the 5th is looking at programming related to potential change in the environment where Intel is coming in and other associated businesses are coming in. And so several organizations and jurisdictions are running concurrent processes. We've talked about the fact that the Evans Foundation and contracted with Planning Next to create the Licking County framework. And they've been engaging in stakeholder feedback and a process. And they have a couple of different things I just want to highlight for people related to this whole strategic planning process. They have produced a couple of different documents. The first round, 1 of public engagement, they created a summary. But one of the things that they did, and I talked about it several months ago, is they put out a QR code, and you filled out that QR code and they asked one question. And the question was, what is most important to you in the future? And the results are in, and over 1,900 responses across the county, and the highest vote getting was schools. So I think that that is really important to think about in the context of our role as a Board of Education and leading Granville schools. So the entire community of Licking County is really thinking about the schools in the context of this regional development that is going to occur. And they continue to want to engage other constituents in other rounds of engagement. One of the other things that they did was they created baseline trend reports, and all of this is on the framework website. And one of the things that they did was they came up with key findings. There are 9 key findings related to economic development, housing, agricultural use, joint planning, the type of housing typology, and environmental constraints. But they also put in each jurisdiction's kind of comprehensive plan highlights. And so in the document, you have Union Township and the Village of Granville and Granville Township, and kind of looking at kind of their approach when their comprehensive plan was originally created or last updated, guiding future land use documents, informing future development patterns, limited utility services, enhancing mobility, strengthening tax base. All those components are kind of articulated in this report. And so I think it's important for taxpayers and community members to understand what's happening related to these processes that are occurring. I'm going to come back to the comprehensive plans because the Village of Granville is working, and the Granville Township trustees are working on that comprehensive plan, which was last approved in 2012, and they're doing a rewrite of it in relationship to this work as well. The last thing that Planning Next and the framework group has completed is a housing findings executive summary, and it looked at what type of housing typology would be necessary to potentially absorb the workforce that is going to be coming related to either the construction and or the actual employees of Intel and their associated businesses. And so they were talking about how they believe that the forecasted number of housing will have to increase, but it shouldn't necessarily overwhelm the current housing system. But there is going to be a need for increasing in housing, obviously. A mixed type of use of homes or number of diverse housing options is also articulated. But then there's also a concern for housing costs for existing residents and how, if the housing market continues to increase and people need to find different types of housing, say a person wants to sell their house and go to an empty nester type of environment, if that house is almost more expensive than the environment that they're in right now, they can't downsize. So they looked at a lot of those types of scenarios. So all those are available on the website for Planning Next and the framework. I believe January 15th, there's going to be a separate meeting of that group to talk about education-specific issues. And so I know a lot of the school superintendent districts are going to be represented in that meeting. A couple of other things related to that. I mentioned that the Granville Village and Granville Township are also rewriting their comprehensive plan. What they're trying to do is create goals and objectives and action items that relate specifically to the items of the comprehensive plan. And some of those action items then would be actionable by those jurisdictions to, say, extend water or sewer to environments to stimulate economic development. They're also going to include mechanisms in that comprehensive report like TIFs and JEDs so that those conversations or those mechanisms are better understood by the community. So that process is going on. I'm involved in that process. I'm working with Denison University on the component on talking about strengthening our schools, and our schools are K-12 all the way through Denison's graduates. So we're working with them on that process. The advocate has been mentioning that the Licking County or Southwest Licking Water and Sewer District has been doing some work in the western side of the county, and that work continues to evolve, and we're keeping an eye on that. I know the village also has water capacity, and so they're working on that process with the comprehensive plan. So from our planning perspective, I think the next thing that we're going to really get kind of detailed on is we know that our facility studies show that we're at capacity in several buildings. So really leaning into the work around facility planning. And that has several components of that, one of which is looking at land availability. And so really building the board's capacity for understanding what ways you can acquire land and what you can do with land. You can acquire land in multiple different ways, and I think that building your capacity on that so that you can think about what does the next 10, 20 years look like for Granville schools, thinking about it now so that you're not in a competitive market 20 years down the road trying to get and acquire land that is more developed than it is right now. So the other thing that we look at, and we are going to look at, is the fiscal impact. This is a budget cycle year, so the budget will be released by the governor around February 1st, and then it will go through the General Assembly, and we'll have some type of understanding of what our funding will be from the state this year for the next 2 years. And so considering that in the strategic planning process, I think is also an important step. So enrollment, we are continuing to look at and monitor with the help of Cooperative Strategies. We have a 3-year contract with them to update those enrollment patterns over the next couple of years. And really, we appreciate the work that the committee is doing. Our next meeting is going to be, I believe, January 24th. And we typically meet on Tuesdays once a month. And we're looking forward to that work continuing. And as action items potentially surface from that committee, they will come to you as a governance body. So, any questions about all the stuff that I just shared?
So January 24th is the tentative task force
Correct.
date, okay?
Yes.
And you'll send out information
Yes.
on that and so forth. I think that the community is really expecting a lot out of that, right? And I think we have a lot to gain from the expertise there. I mean, we've got 20 or 30 people that are really experts in development and real estate and so forth advising us. And so I think that there's a lot to come from that. You know, I think just that, you know, financial sustainability in the long term is a really important one. The real estate aspects, the cost of real estate and what that's going to do to our property taxes and so forth are really important. But as important as, you know, our own strategic task force, which is really well done, it's not in a vacuum. And, you know, I just want to take a minute to thank the Evans Foundation and all of the community organizations that sponsored the project Framework Licking County. It was great that they came out to our football game with their survey. They found the QR code all over the place. They, again, surveyed thousands of people. And the fact that schools was the majority of responses out of anything people could say was really powerful. And I've had some conversations with the folks at Foundation, and I'm excited that they're re-engaging and thinking about that because, you know, we can't act in a vacuum in terms of what's going to happen with enrollment and growth and traffic and things like that. The traffic doesn't stop at our border, right? So it's great that there's an organization that's really taking it on. And so thanks very much to the Framework LC group and the Evans Foundation for sure.
Do you have any sense of the turnover in the Ohio House with the Stephen Cup leading? Do you have any sense of the new leadership's?
Oh, okay, yes. Yeah, so
It's not-
with the fair school
it's
funding,
going to be.
yeah, so just to bring everybody up to speed, in the last budget cycle, we were able to have the fair school funding formula adopted. And in that adoption, there was a proposed 3 budget cycle phase-in process because the work done to calculate what it costs to educate a student was done, but those numbers need to be updated every budget cycle, and then more money should be added in to make that funding model work the way it's intended to. Speaker Stevens, Jason Stevens, who was elected, was a person who's run levy campaigns before for his local school district. I think he understands the importance of school funding. Actually, I think one of the reasons why he's in this seat is because of the importance of that funding formula and that continuing. So I do believe that he will represent a very similar perspective that Speaker Cup represented.
That's reassuring.
Yeah. You're welcome. Any other questions? I think it's pretty show. Monthly financial report. Okay.
All right, so we are halfway through the fiscal year now, December, and we are also at the lowest cash balance point in our annual cash balance cycle. So once we get into January, we'll start receiving property tax advance payments, and we'll have an income tax payment, and we'll start building our cash balance up from there. So right now, we are about $4.5 million dollars above where we were last December, and that's building upon the cash that we carried over that was unspent at the end of last year. In comparison, this is our annual cash balance cycle. Just wanted to share this as a point of reference because we do have the second resolution for the income tax renewal on the board agenda tonight. So again, the black bars here represent total revenue. Gray is the total total expenditures. And then the line represents the cash balance. So the green line is our cash balance with the income tax renewal. And then the red line represents the cash balance without the renewal. So again, just wanted to show what the cash balance is going to look like on an annual basis and the difference there with and without the renewal. So in 2024, without the income tax renewal, we're looking at an negative $11 million cash balance.
27.
27.
You said 24.
I'm in.
And that's the year-end cash balance?
Yes. So there could be points during that cash, or during that fiscal year, that would be even less than that. Because the end, if you look here.
There's about
yeah,
$5 million difference between the ending and the current.
Yeah, June is not necessarily the lowest cash balance point. It's close, but December is typically the lowest. Okay, so looking at revenue for the month of December compared to last December, we're still seeing some timing difference of fee payments. So we rolled those out later due to the implementation of PowerSchool this year. So those fee payments are coming in later during the year than they did last year. But overall, fee collections will actually be less than prior years because we did eliminate the Chromebook fee, activity fee, and elementary fees as an acknowledgement that other expenses were going up. So that will even out as we progress through the year as those payments roll in. Year to date, local tax revenue, which includes the property tax and the income tax, is up a little over $500,000. The majority of that is the income tax, which is up in total 6.5% over prior year. We talked about that. And then all other revenue looks like it's up significantly, but again, that's just really an accounting adjustment due to the return of advances for the ESSER funds. On the expenditure side, salary and benefits are actually down slightly compared to last December. Majority of that is due to the medical insurance reduction that we had. We paid that in December for the effective date of January 1st. And then also some of that is timing of supplemental payments that we paid in November this year, but were paid in December last year. And then all of their expenses, that is a timing issue on our lease purchase payment for the debt for the roof at GIS. So that's just a timing difference there. Year-to-date expenditure comparison, salary and benefits are up due to just our typical steps and base increases, as well as additional positions we've added due to enrollment growth and some severance payments. All other expenses includes software material purchases due to cyber liability requirements and the HVAC project, as well as that debt payment that I mentioned. So jumping to our COVID-related funds, I realize I need to actually adjust this number to include the county funds that we just received, which is shown here. So we received notification that we'll be getting about $66,000 through the county for extended learning grant. So what that means is we'll be able to extend that intervention position that we've had this year at the elementary and all through next year. We were kind of up in the air whether we would be able to do that. So between those funds and some of our remaining funds, we'll be able to maintain that position. So that's salary and benefits for that position. And then the big change in December was we made significant progress on the HVAC project at the elementary. So I believe we have one more payment left on that project, but it is the temporary heat has been removed and the system is functioning. They're just waiting on some final components to plug in to finalize that project. So I'm sure those teachers and students are pleased with that. And then we have our cash reconciliation, and that is it for the December financial report, unless there's any other questions or comments. Thank you.
Good. Okay, we've reached the time in our agenda where we welcome public comments. Anyone is welcome to step to the podium, state your name and address, and speak for up to 5 minutes. The board.
Joe Curry, 2647 Loudon Street. I've got a couple topics I want to discuss tonight. We'll go easy first and then get into some more diligent things. First off, Raina, I did hear about you leaving before, so I've been questioning a lot leading up to this meeting about what's that look like, who's filling it, how does that go? So is there any consideration? The community voted, a lot of people that are reaching out to me personally, like Dennis Capps, that's the next person for the seat. A lot of justification behind it is, Ronna, you got 22% of the community vote this last year, and Capps is a close second at 21%. So just kind of considering how does that weigh into the board's decision. My understanding is that there is a request put out that if you are interested, send in your resume, send in your letter of intent, so to speak, that you are interested in the position, and then there's interviews and kind of a down selection from the board of how that gets. And I just didn't know if there was any consideration from the communities involved in being spoken for recently, if Dennis Capps has any relevancy for that. Outside of that, let me see my phone, Miles.
And Mr. Curry, I have a couple of slides next for board
Cover that.
discussion that I'm going to cover a lot of the
Perfect.
things that
You usually do after I speak. You cover the things that I talked about.
Yeah.
Recently, a school survey was sent out to 7th grade through 12th grade. And just a brief, quick rundown. I believe it was 125 questions, 120 questions. Number 1, how old are you? Number 2, what grade are you in? 3, are you Hispanic or Latino? 4, what is your race? 5, how tall are you? 6, how much do you weigh? Number 7, what is your sex? Female, male, transgender, gender, non-conforming. Number 8, which of the following best describes you? Heterosexual, straight, gay or lesbian, bisexual. I describe myself, my sexual identity, some other way. I am not sure about my sexual identity, questioning. I do not know what this question is asking. I'm generally concerned with that as a parent. There's a fine line from what I believe personally that the education system should be teaching their kids, what I should be teaching the kids. And the education system as a whole, just by the sheer volume of time that you give with our kids, you have a huge influence on the impact of how those kids see the world and how they interact and how they're educated. And I believe, my personal opinion, that the last decade, I don't know how long this has been going on, but from my perspective, the last decade, we've kind of slipped into this thing where we're committing to this whole child vision as what the education system sees the whole child should be, as opposed to what the parent sees the whole child should be. So we're talking about sexual identity. I mean, it's in the first 10 questions on this. And I'll get into the survey a little bit more because there is a lot of relevancy, I think, in the survey. But questioning sexual identity and the discussion that the board had last year of teaching sexual orientation and sexual conduct to kids K through 3, it baffles my mind that the education system as a whole even entertains that as a thought process to teach kids. Again, education should be academic. If you look on the international level, the United States is falling on the international level on competencies in academics. But yet we're focused on other things and making, my opinion again, the whole child as the education system sees it, not what the parents should be. So, in general, I'm uncomfortable with that survey. These questions of the survey. The survey goes down to get a lot more things, and I think the mental health Again, it's 120 questions, I just read to you two. I think there's about 6, but I was like, I don't know about, those are the 2 that really jumped out at me. 120 questions that says, are you suicidal? Do you have problems at home? Do you drink? Do you do drugs? I see that as valuable, right? Where does that information go? Because it doesn't go to the parents. Let's say my kid says, I am suicidal. I have thought about committing suicide. I've tried to commit suicide. Where does that information go and what's done with it? I think simply blanketing the answer to that to say, well, we care for mental health for our students, well, that's obvious, right? We're school board members, we're parents, we're human beings, so we care about the well-being of our students, of our kids, anywhere. But where does that information go and what is exactly done with it? Is there a system in place that identifies those red flags inside of that and says, okay, this is what happens? And at what point does it happen? Maybe that's all handed out, but I don't know where that information goes. Next, land purchase. So again, I have trouble looking at the projections through 2027 from a fiscal standpoint because I don't believe it's transparent. You have projected deficit of $11 million through 2027. You have a $5 million deficit next year, $1 million deficits for the subsequent years for land purchase and like a placeholder in the budget that creates this deficit for $1 million each year afterwards. So a couple things. Green space. Have we looked at green space? Is that an option you can build on? 100-acre land lab and GIS. Is that an option you can build on? We've had some of these discussions before, but this is more for the public format and the people that may be watching online. Union Township development. So Intel is buying land right now. Intel bought land 3/4 of a mile. I'm a real estate investor, so I'm kind of out into these things a little bit. But Intel bought land within 3/4 of a mile from their hub, right? And they're paying $65,000 an acre, 3/4 of a mile away. So is it fair to say that at the most, the school would have to pay $65,000 an acre? I think it is. I think it's a little high, but let's say $65,000 an acre. How much does the school need? Do they need 20 acres? Okay, you're looking at about $1.3 million, not $5 million. Okay, so I gave you several options: green space, land lab, Union Township development. How much are we going to pay for an acre? I'm kind of networked into some of the people who are in the know of the Union Township development, and as a real estate investor and developer, it would behoove me as a developer to talk to a school system, and there has been this discussion, I know, for the board, so I appreciate you guys going out there and making that discussion because it absolutely needs to happen. So from a developer standpoint, if I can buy land at, say, $20,000 an acre, and I can donate land at $65,000 an acre, that benefits me wildly of taxes, right? So if I donate $65,000 an acre at 20 acres, I get to get that tax write-off, which is a huge benefit for me. I get to be the savior of Granville schools. And what's right in my backyard of my neighborhood? A school that your kids can walk to. So what does that do to my land value? It increases my land value. It's a win-win-win. I say that to say the budget for $5 million in the subsequent years, I don't think is appropriate in what is going to be spent long-term. That's all I got, under 5 minutes.
Not quite, that's all right. Thank you.
I'm making a mess here.
Anyone else care to make a public comment? Okay, thank you. And the board is always welcome to input by email, phone, or here in person, so thank you. Okay, we're going to start our board discussion, but Jeff Brown is going to lead us off, like you mentioned, with answering a couple of Mr. Curry's questions about the process for appointment of a board position after we consider it.
And do you want to keep this cute? Okay, as promised, I think it's important to kind of communicate the appointment process and so that people are aware of what the steps the board will take to fill the appointment that is currently available at this time. Excellent, thank you very much, sir. Right. Board appointment process. Couple of things I want to just make sure people are aware of. So that the filling of a board vacancy is actually governed by Ohio Revised Code 3313-111 or 11. And we do have board policy that talks about how to deal with an unexpired term fulfillment. The reason for vacancy, there's a couple of different reasons that are codified in Ohio Revised Code. One of them is non-residency, as Sode kind of alluded to in her resignation. And an important date is the effective date of the resignation. And so for our purposes, the reason for vacancy is non-residence, and the effective date of the resignation is January 31st of 2023. The unexpired term, the way that it's broken out is in Ohio Revised Code, the appointee will serve for 11 months until December 31st of 2023. The appointee would then need to run and be elected in the general election in November to fill the remaining 2 years on Ms. O'Day's term. So the appointment only lasts for 11 months, and then the general election will determine the replacement. And so in November's general election, there are 3 board members that their term is ending. So there are several vacancies. If they decide to run again, then obviously they're incumbents. But then anybody else interested in running for those terms is also able to run at that time. So let's talk a little bit about timelines and procedures. So statute requires the board to act to fill the vacancy at its next regular or special board meeting, which is held at least 10 days after the vacancy occurs. And that vacancy obviously is the trigger date is January 31st. The board must act to fill the vacancy within 30 days of the effective date of the resignation. So our targeted timeline, I'm going to skip down to the bottom, is to select and appoint a new board member at the regular February Board of Education meeting, which is February 27th. So obviously falls within those 30 days. But what we plan on doing is the board will announce via press release the vacancy and appointment process the week of January 9th, which is this week. We're going into executive session tonight for the purpose of talking about the appointment process in a little bit more detail. Once I have that conversation, I will be able to fully complete the press release, and then the advocate will most likely pick that up and communicate that on our behalf as well. But applications will include the application itself, a cover letter, and resume. It's not an onerous process. We don't want it to be prohibitive in getting people who are interested in the board. Applications will be available by on the Granville Schools website. It will be on that front landing page. Submissions will be sent to my assistant Janelle King, and we will talk about the process of how to deal with the number of big applications that we have as we go through this process tonight. The board will collect applications for about 2 weeks until 4 p.m. on January 27th of 2023 in order to be considered. Interviews will be conducted at a special meeting of the board in executive session at a date to be determined, obviously tonight. And that we'll communicate that information so that everybody understands and we're transparent about the process. This process is very similar to the process that occurred when Mr. Wolf was appointed to fill the vacancy that occurred by Mr. King's, yes, thank you very much. Andrew's vacancy that was non-residence related as well. So we have gone through this process multiple times in multiple years. I remember Mr. Janice was also a person who was on the board and went through the appointment process as well. So this is a process that we are familiar with, and we will execute with fidelity. And then our goal is to appoint the new board member at the February regular meeting of the Board of Education. Their criteria for selection is going to be based on their discussion of what they find as valuable and the need for the board, and considering all the things that others mentioned tonight. So those things will be at the discretion of the board to select. So that's kind of just the timelines and procedures. So look for the press release this week, and we will have more information to come. If you would give me the honor of maybe answering some of the questions that were presented related to public comment. I can do that as well.
Anything else?
So Mr. Curry referenced the OES survey. The OES survey is a survey that is conducted by the Ohio Department of Health and the Ohio Department of Mental Health in collaboration with Ohio University. It is a survey that is not mandatory. Parents and students have the ability to opt out at any point. If a person starts the test and doesn't want to answer certain questions, they don't have to. It is a broad picture of a district and community or county's view of mental health and wellness across the board. It is anonymous, so there is no direct report to parents or other people related to what a student puts on that survey. We do also have a separate process that we work with Nationwide Children's Hospital called Signs of Suicide. And that process is very specific, and it is facilitated by our counseling staff with the support of Nationwide Children's Hospital. And if something is red flagged, there is a process that is conducted based on that red flag. So there's a separate process not related to this survey, but also related to mental health and addressing issues of potential suicide ideation. In the past, previous to the OES survey, there was a survey called the PRIDE survey that was conducted by Our Futures of Lincoln County that was also given, and that data was utilized by our Whole Child Committee to look at what signs and issues were popping up, so to speak, in that survey. So I would say OES has been in service for about 6 years, and I believe PRIDE was probably in service for 15 years before that. So I just wanted to add that context, and I believe that we have addressed the questions.
Relative to that survey, I'll say that it might not be obvious when that comes out. Maybe what would be useful is a partial review of that at a board meeting. We've done that in the past, and just review the kind of the state of the schools from the student perspective like that. I do know that the Whole Child Committee definitely digs into those details a lot more. And at the building level, our administration and the administration overall really uses those responses to guide a lot of their programming and other kinds of educational options that they give to kids and so forth. So, and it's really important information that comes out of that that's definitely acted on.
Yeah, and I would say another entity that looks at that data is the Lincoln County Health Commission.
Yeah.
And Chad Brown has created vaping programs, cessation programs related to vaping based on some of the information that is cultivated through those surveys across the county.
Do you think there are places that community members can discuss or share some of their comments and thoughts on that relative to going back to the source of it? Because we don't write the questions ourselves.
Correct.
Right? So is there a forum there?
Yeah.
Or is there an organization
Parents
that
are
people
always-
might contact to be effective, right? Because, I think that we don't have a lot of say in changing those questions necessarily.
Yeah, I
And
would
so
say,
that would be useful with feedback for that organization to receive.
yeah, so it is a statewide organization, it's a governmental entity. But Ohio University does have a couple of faculty that I think do the data analysis. But I would say if people have questions about that, please engage myself so that we can actually sit down and walk through their questions and concerns.
Yeah.
Can I
The Signs of Suicide program, is that only in 7th grade, or I can't
I
remember?
believe it's 7 through 12.
Okay, every year.
Yeah.
Oh,
Which is
It's-
independent.
Yeah.
Independent
No, I know
of
it is
survey
independent,
and
but I
so
mean,
forth,
it-
but it's a really.
Well, I would also, I'm
Yeah.
just not to, I also would feel concerned if there was a question about mental health and suicide, and that was the only thing that was being put out there, and then as a parent, I wasn't getting information, but I did know that we had
Yeah,
the signs of
Absolutely,
suicide.
yeah.
But, you know, my
Much more.
oldest is not
Yeah.
in high school yet, so I didn't know that it ran through, so I appreciate that.
So the survey is done statewide?
School districts have the ability to opt in or not participate. We have always given that survey, we gave Pride, this was the replacement survey, and so we've used that data longitudinally, and so we agreed to give the survey. So it is optional for us.
But it's also no cost, right?
It is no cost.
You know, getting this kind of information through a quality design survey is an expensive proposition otherwise. And we considered paying in the past for others, and we have had to. And so it's really information that I think we need to continue to generate in some way. And so, thank you. Now we got data on it.
At our last whole child committee meeting, Mr. Morris touched on that survey and why we give it, and it is anonymous, so parents don't get that feedback, but also nobody's going to know which students said something specific or how they answered specifically. But it's valuable for our district to know what are the issues that are occurring in our schools right now, because we're out of touch. I don't know what's going on with the teenagers right now. So it's useful information to know what the kids are, like what problems are occurring in our, with the kids at our schools, so that we can develop programs and like the counselors can direct their energy in specific areas. And that's why it touches on taboo things. Of course, these are uncomfortable topics for parents to like, you know, you get concerned, and I understand that. But it's also, I really appreciate that our schools are making the effort to touch on these things so that we can help our students through these issues. And another thing that I wanted to say is on academic performance, my husband and I were talking about this the other day because he found a book, a math book that he did, that he had when he was younger. But our schools, what's unique about our school district is that unlike in other countries, people like say, oh, you know, they're doing better in math or science or whatever. And I think people have that perception just because some other countries are more like militant about it. Like my husband never had like PE or art or music. It was very militant. But my third grader is doing algebra, geometry. My first grader is doing division and multiplication. So and music and language and art and physical education. We are able to combine all of the humanities that make a kid well-rounded and the academics. So we are performing very well on all of these things. So I just wanted to address that, because what may be true on a national average of quality of education is not the case for our school district. Granville schools are performing at a very high level, and I appreciate the whole child and well-rounded education aspect.
I would love to engage Mr. Curry in a conversation about the academic performance as well, because I can elaborate as well on some of the things, and I completely agree with your assessment. And you have to be cautious about data, especially at an international level. And there's other metrics that I would say paint a different picture related to entrepreneurial spirit, other things, creativity, curiosity, that I think we do very well on, and have equal, if not more value, long-term to success for an average citizen. So anyway, not a topic for tonight, but maybe a future topic.
Our official board discussion topics were still the appointment process
Yes.
and the levy.
So let's talk a little bit about the levy.
And I'll share, first of all, on the appointment process and things like my own perspective, it was probably like 12 years ago right, that there was a board vacancy that opened up due to non-residents or board member resigned for some reason. And I had been attending board meetings, like every meeting for a couple of years, and the finance committee and all these kinds of things. So I'm like, oh, that's great, I'll put my hat in the ring for this appointment. And it was great because there were a number of other community members that volunteered. And Russ Janice was one of them, right? And as soon as I heard that Russ Janice put his resume in, I'm like, pick him. I remember we sat down, Amy, and I said, you guys really could use this lawyer who's actually run levy campaigns and things like that more than you could use me right now. So I encourage the board to pick Russ, and I'm pretty proud of that, although I didn't actually win that election, it was the board. But Fred, maybe you can give your perspective on it as well, and how that appointment process went.
I think it's a pretty easy process. It's smooth. The interview process, at least when I went through it, I think they take everything into consideration for candidates. They asked, I felt were really good questions. I'd encourage anyone that's interested to apply. I believe we had 12 people apply. I think for some reason that resonates with me. And I was encouraged by that. I thought that was great that many folks were interested in serving. So I would, at least from my perspective, it's a great process. And if you're interested, you should do it. And I think this board will be really open to folks wanting to serve and seeing what they want to, how they feel about the schools and those types of things. But it's not a real tough, the application's really easy. I think the hardest part for me was the technology, trying to load something. But it's a simple process. So I encourage folks to apply if they're interested.
And I hope the challenge that we have is similar to the challenge that we've had before, and that we have too many qualified applicants, right? And it's great to engage everybody that's willing to in the schools. And I know there's a lot of people that are willing to step up and things like that. And so I hope we get a number of people, because we have a lot of needs in terms of how we run this year. We've got a lot of things on our plate with the growth that's happened in the levy and certainly all of the regular things that happen in our school district. So thank you all for considering applying.
And if you don't get it, you can still stay involved, like some of us did, when they didn't get their position, or position when they applied. So there's lots of other ways to be involved as well.
You could be a village planning.
I'm just saying. All right, let's talk a little bit about the levy. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the levy conversation. We have an action item in Brittany's section in the finance as the second step in finishing the process to put the 0.75 all income tax for a 5-year period of time on the ballot in May. I guess my question to you is there anything else that anyone has heard related to that process, or if there's any questions that anyone has related to that item?
How much does it cost for us to be on the levy again, on
So-
the ballot again?
So it depends. It depends on if there's other issues on the ballot. Typically, the cost is, I believe, and I'm going to use rough estimates, you probably know better than I do, but it's usually like 40 to 60,000, but it gets spread across different groups. If we're the only group on, it's probably going to be close to $40,000.
I'll be taking the resolutions to the board of elections this week, and I've been asked them if I have an estimate. We're pretty early in the timeline based on our meeting, so like they might not know what we're getting about the cost.
Yeah, but we can get back to you on that to get an accurate number.
What's the deadline to get on the ballot?
February 1st, I think is when we have to file this, or February meeting would have been too late, so it'll be December or January.
Which is just generally a little bit early, right? And just right on the heels of our previous levy campaign and things like that, which I think made it kind of challenging, in holiday season, things like that, to get feedback. But things are going to start gearing up. If this is approved and we choose to put it on the ballot, it's going to be official. And that'll require us getting a committee together or asking for volunteers on our committee to support it. We saw from the finances that without the levy, our cash balance balance goes down, right? And so we need to be very clear on communications of the importance of this, right? And so if there are folks in the community that are willing to support, we need all that we can get in terms of coming up with the right communications to get this out there. I guess from my continued conversations, because I always am chatting with my community members about this, the permanence of the last levy was a challenge, right? And by going with a pure 5-year replacement of the same thing, a lot of people have expressed their support, and I'm hopeful that we can get that support from the entire community and find a way to communicate the importance of it as a continuing source for us, but for the next 5 years, if we can get this through, that's exactly what we need from a finance perspective. So I don't have necessarily drastically new information back from community members, other than I've been continuing to hear the same as we heard just after the election.
So my question is, we have, if we vote on it, we put 0.75 on the ballot, and then if we are bringing in more revenue than needed, how would we pull back? I know that we can, as a board, pull back on, so what does that look like?
Yeah, so it would require just a board resolution. It would not need to go to the community to vote on. It would just be a matter of meeting the timing of when it would go into effect. So it would have to be done on an annual basis, based on the calendar year, which is the tax year.
Okay.
So it would just be a board resolution.
And we would go down again, the way to bring in less would be or to decrease taxes, maybe that way to put it, but would be to go down by those 0.25 increments, is that how we would?
Yes, so the income tax is only in 0.25% increments, so it would have to be a reduction in 0.25%. So you could go down from 0.5 to 0.5 or to 0.25. Those would be the options.
And we've talked in the past about also using property tax as a way to reduce our collections and give the community less taxes overall, that if our cash balance is too high, we can offer a property tax holiday, if you will. And so I think at the point where we're facing that, I think those are both options that we need to consider. I can see some complexity with changing the income tax rates relative to employers withholding that. But if that's the right direction, we can do that without a community vote, but we can do that just with a board resolution.
And so property tax is a pause, and is it also, does it also have to be done in an annual?
So actually, the income tax, now that you're saying that, it would be a resolution that would be passed and it would be effective until you pass another resolution to change it back to 0.75.
And it could be at any point in the year.
It would have to be done by, I can't remember the exact date for it to be effective for January 1st of the following tax year.
Okay.
But it would be in effect then, say it was reduced to 0.5, that would stay at 0.5 until the board acted to increase it back up to 0.75 for income tax. For property tax, the board has to act annually, which should be at our next meeting actually, to set property tax rates. So it would be during that process where we would identify a specific levy, and instead of approving that tax rate at what is calculated, we would set that at 0 for that particular tax year. That would be approved as part of the tax rate resolution. And that's what the county auditor would then collect. They would not collect on that levy. Then the following year, the board would decide, okay, do you want to go back to the calculated effective rate, or do you want to maintain that at 0? So that would be an annual action by the board. But it's an annual action every year to approve those tax rates. It's just, we don't discuss it quite as much as we have. It's just one of those things that we typically just approve, but that's the process.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and one of the things we also talked about, I mentioned this at our last board meeting, was the cash balance policy and setting a minimum and a maximum. So it's very common for districts to have a minimum cash balance, which then would trigger the need for a new levy. But we've also talked about having a maximum, which could potentially trigger one of these actions by the board on the income tax or the property tax side. So that's something that we're doing some research on to see what some other districts have set up as those thresholds, and hope to be able to bring something to the board as a recommendation for that cash balance policy.
Okay. You said the finance committee is discussing
Yeah,
that?
so We mentioned it at the finance committee, and then I mentioned it briefly during my financial report to the board at our December meeting.
Yes.
So we'll run that through the finance committee just to get input and feedback from that group before we bring it to the board.
Can I ask one more question? Okay, so the money that we bring in from this levy is about 20% of our budget?
It's 20, I want to be clear that it's 20% of our total revenue that comes in for the year.
Okay.
That's different than it being 20% of our budget.
Okay.
Because our budget, which are our total expenditures for the year, does not exactly equal our revenue that comes in. So that means that part of it goes into our cash balance that we carry over from year to year. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes. Would it be possible, next meeting, however, to give us that kind of percentage of what, like, people want to know where the money's going to, and, I mean, it's going to fund the schools, and it's going to, but all the things that happen at school, right? But maybe if you could put it in a pie, kind of like, this is the chunk, and here's all the things, and we know that 80% of our budget is staff and benefits, and
Yeah.
is there some way to visualize
Yeah.
that for us?
Yeah, we can do that. The challenging thing is, with the income tax, it goes into the general fund. It goes into the pot of cash. So it's not exactly tracked to specific expenditures.
Right.
So we can't say, hey, it's being used for these 10 teachers over here. And we can't say it's being used for the electric bill and utilities. So it's hard to say specifically what those revenue dollars are being used for, because it does just go into the general operating fund.
General
But we-
operating, not capital.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. However, we can use general operating for capital projects, which we have done this year with the HVAC project at the elementary and high school. So it could also have been used on one of those two projects. So that's where it's really clear cut. You can say it's 20% of our revenue that comes in, but it doesn't exactly correlate to a percentage of the budget.
Percent being used because of, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I can try to put together some slides and some graphs to walk through that a little bit better, but
Maybe,
that's-
yeah, I mean, maybe it's important to think about what would be missing or where we would have to cut, but maybe that's another conversation, maybe that's a future conversation. Okay,
I think those
sorry,
are
I got a
all,
little deep there.
no, no, I think those are all really good questions and stuff we really need to nail this spring, right? Because I think there was a little bit of questions about that in the fall, and
Well,
people
I'm
didn't
questioning,
quite
yeah.
understand
If I'm not sure how to
exactly.
present it, I'm
Right.
sure a lot of people are not sure how to understand it.
Right.
So, Yeah.
And a lot of people have a lot of different questions, and we need to figure out how we as a district or the committee or somehow we get information out there so these things are really answered, right? And find a mechanism for communication that ensures that we've got that, right? So I think we'll, over the next few board meetings, I'm sure this spring, continue to kind of roll out some more information like that and to try and internalize it and understand it ourselves, the true impact, and make the decisions that we'll need to based on the outcome.
Are you planning on having, like, well, I know that anybody who wants to go to the finance committee can go. How are you going to announce when the next one is? And then how are we going to encourage people to attend that so that we can hear their input?
I would love to know the answer to that question because I send out communications about finance committee. We get very small turnout. So I encourage anybody who has an interest in joining finance committee to send an email to myself or Janelle to get on the email list to notify. We can also put them on the district calendar.
And like maybe the principal emails or?
And I think the other thing is, our role as a governance team, administration and board, is to educate, not advocate. And so I think it's important for us to put together, information that is readily available to the community, that answers some of the questions in a very factual manner. And so, as we solicit and get questions, it's important to surface those to Brittany and I so that we can put together those FAQs and information for people that they can dig into.
I think people are kind of challenged to understand that difference between the school district's role in educating relative to our finances, and for example, a levy committee who is educating as well, but maybe seen as advocates, right? And I think we need to be kind of clear on that, that our hands are very much tied legally in terms of what we can say about a levy or the potential outcome of a levy. And our time is very much constrained in that the school district resources are not allowed to be used for advocating for a levy. So it's hard to answer a lot of these questions, right, that come up as a natural part of the levy cycle, right, that we have to be able to do. So we need to find a way that we're feeding the levy committee, who has a lot more ability to get coffee chats together and get groups together and to communicate effectively, better than anything we have in the past. I don't think we did many community forums. Maybe that's a way that we can more effectively communicate. So I'm eager for the levy committee to get together again and start to formulate some ideas about this. And the district will certainly be supportive as possible with our factual information, but it is quite constrained in terms of the time that we can spend in answering a lot of questions that are valid questions that need to be answered.
I had a constituent reach out to me and ask how they can donate to the levy campaign, and I didn't know how to answer that, so I'm sure I could go to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once
One of the
they're
org, I believe, is still active, and I'm not sure who's near how it works. Okay, so that's discussion on the levy. We covered that in the appointment process. Those were the two things on the board discussion. Is there anything else for board discussion that people have questions on or comments about? Can we proceed with the action agenda?
Yes. Okay, action
All right.
item 10.01 is the approval of board policies. There are 4. Brittany shared the first reading of those at the December meeting. Any questions or concerns?
A motion?
So moved.
Second.
Shaw? Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds? Aye. Mr. Flynn?
Aye.
Thank you. Next is the consent agenda, 11.01 A through C9, with the addition of Rana in section 8, resignations.
So moved.
Second.
Obviously, with appreciation of service to the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other things you want to highlight in there, Jeff?
Yes, so we have several donations, the Archery Club and Theron Rogerson Scholarship, and we also have a change in the resignation date for retirement purpose, and then, of course, we are getting back into field trips, so we have the 8th grade DC, Washington DC trip, May 16th to the 19th.
I'm not going, no. No, thank you.
Is a great, okay. So what's she talking about?
Okay, and so yeah, I'd like to make one quick comment. Thank you for your service very much so. It's been great to see how eager you've been diving in. Right? It takes a lot to step up and run an election campaign and things like that. And I'm pleased that you've done that, and you've really brought to the board a great perspective and things like that. I'm a little envious of your adventure that you have coming with your young boys. The international exposure is really a treat that will serve them well for the rest of their lives. So I wish you and the whole family the best. You've got a home here in Granville if you ever chance to return. And thanks for all your service to the board and community.
Pleasure, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments on the consent agenda? No.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
Item 12.01, approval of the December 2022 financial report.
So moved.
Second.
Any additional questions or comments? Item 12.02, approval of the resolution determining to proceed with the proposition of a renewal income tax.
So moved.
Second.
As we mentioned previously, this is the second of 2 required resolutions to put the income tax renewal on the ballot in May. And this is the resolution that actually contains the ballot language, which again is dictated by state law. So we do not have any flexibility in that language. And so this resolution, along with the previous one, will be again taken to the Board of Elections as we certified to get everything filed.
Okay, let's do it.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. Okay, at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to consider the appointment of a public employee or official and to consider the purchase of property for public purposes.
So moved. Second.
Roll.
Ms. Deeds?
Aye.
Ms. Shaw?
Aye.
Ms. O'Day?
Aye.
Mr. Wolf?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye. I will point out that there is no action following the executive session, so we adjourn from there. Thank you all for attending and paying attention to the budget.